think one of the things that we like to nuance around resiliency is that people think resilient people don't fall. Resilient people don't encounter struggles and that things that tip them off balance or knock them over. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of people have, that life has to be perfect and in control and in charge. And I'm not saying that's a wrong narrative, but it can be problematic if it kind of drives you. But we all fall. And what happens is your resiliency is your ability to bounce back. So it's this kind of this yoing factor, this bounce factor. And so resilience for us is like a bungee rope. It doesn't stop you from falling, but it stops you from going splat.
Welcome to Prevention Leaders Podcast with Dave Closson, your source for insights into the world of substance misuse prevention. Each episode, Dave brings you the latest strategies, expert discussions, and real-life success stories designed to empower your work and inspire impactful change. Whether you're a prevention professional, community advocate, or simply passionate about making a difference, this podcast will keep you informed and motivated. Get ready to lead with a confidence that drives lasting results. Let's lead the change together.
Oh, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Prevention Leaders Podcast. And if you can't tell by the sound of my voice and you're not watching the video, I am smiling like you would not believe, because today I'm back together with my friend Shane from Australia, who is a leading voice in prevention and resilience on the global stage. And we had a wonderful time together in Vienna at the 68th CND, lots of deep dive conversations. And so I'm excited to bring him onto the podcast to give you all a chance to meet him and hear a little bit of his wisdom. So Shane, welcome.
Wow. Well, thank you for having me, Dave. And that's a lot of gravy for a very small potato, but I appreciate it.
Before we get into a deep dive conversation, sure, can you give us an overview of the Dalgarno Institute? What do y'all do?
Sure. The Dalgarno Institute's been through a number of iterations over a long period of time, and arguably it's around 150, 160 years old in its tenure, going way back to the early days when alcohol was the single biggest issue in culture, and it was completely unregulated, out of control. And the harm has been done in culture on a global level was staggering, unregulated. And in fact, in Australia, if you just for the listeners who are not familiar with our history, our first currency was actually rum. So that tells you a little bit about the Australian problematic issue with alcohol. And we decided in the latest iteration to rebrand it as the Dalgarno Institute after a remarkable woman by the name of Isabella Dalgarno, who was a leading light in the what was called the anti-alcohol temperance movement. The temperance movement had both religious and non-religious sectors in it, but there was basically a movement to challenge this entrenched, not just narrative, but broken, system of just wanton, unregulated, unleashed, unfettered alcohol use. And the harm's been done to families was horrendous. And she stood up in the marketplace, in the public square, when women were ostracized, marginalized. And so we thought we'd rebrand after that remarkable woman, that pioneering spirit. And so we're basically in that context. We're an alcohol and other drug education, advocacy and resourcing health charity. So we work both in top-down, bottom-up advocacy and education, more advocacy at the top end with policy-making, governments and whatnot, but obviously the bottom end up there with community, with families, schools, sporting clubs, local governments, state governments. We work across all basic government sectors, but clearly the drive is to recalibrate community, to get them to think outside the space of that alcohol and other drugs are just part of life, and this is what we do, and it's what we've always done, particularly alcohol. It's been the legal drug that's been entrenched for so long and what it does, but illicit drugs obviously are a clear issue and a clear problem and a growing threat to on so many other levels. In fact, we now know that cannabis now sort of eclipses and other drugs eclipse the substance used by drivers in our country. I'm not sure if that's the same in the States. I think I've picked up some data and stats that that's the case. So, yeah, we've got the problem emerging as well. So that's kind of who we are. And like I said, it's been around a long, long time. We've just continued around the last 15, 16 years. I've been involved with it and just reinventing it and trying to grow it and expand it and its impact and influence. And for the sake of community, and particularly the emerging generation, Gen Now and Gen Next, really, really important, because the legacies that have been left before by some of our cultural architects has been pretty ordinary. And although our pioneers were, champions at sort of pulling back. And so we're big advocates of fence building in that context, fence building on the cliff, to pull people back from that, and rather than drive the ambulance to the bottom. That's another story we won't go into today, but it's one of our platforms. So that's a little bit. Hopefully that made sense. It wasn't too eclectic.
Yes, I'm tracking right on track. And
cool.
Listeners, one of the things that really, really drove me or pulled me to the Dalgarno Institute was resilience. And that, as I look on my own healing journey in my own life with that resilience lens, the resilience building opportunities and those things that kind of made it harder for me to be more resilient and those certain time periods. And, that's a lot of what y'all talk about is resilience. And so could you kind of just give us, a definition, an off the cuff, putting you on the spot? What does it mean to be resilient?
The definition, for want of a better word, that we've kind of embraced, because there's a lot of great definitions out there. There's a lot of great sort of nuances around resilience and its application in different settings. But basically, we've referred to it as the bungee rope. Yeah, resilience is like a bungee rope. And for those who are not familiar with the bungee jumping, you may have seen or may not have seen the bridges, cliffs, or whatever with people standing on there. It was sort of first started in New Zealand, but you tie this remarkably strong elastic band to your ankles and throw yourself off a cliff, and you bounce up and down, and it's a lot of good fun, a bit of a thrill. Done it myself, threw myself off a bridge in New Zealand, and so I've been there, done that. A lot of fun, a lot of yelling and screaming and bouncing around. But basically, the resilience is a bungee rope. It doesn't stop you from falling, and I think one of the things that we like to nuance around resiliency is that people think resilient people don't fall. Resilient people don't encounter struggles and that things that tip them off balance or knock them over. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of people have, that life has to be perfect and in control and in charge. And I'm not saying that's a wrong narrative, but it can be problematic if it kind of drives you. But we all fall. And what happens is your resiliency is your ability to bounce back. So it's this kind of this yoing factor, this bounce factor. And so resilience for us is like a bungee rope. It doesn't stop you from falling, but it stops you from going splat, from hitting the bottom, that relentless deceleration trauma that does so much harm to us psychologically. And when people experience it, it's awful. So the idea is this thing helps you, this capacity, this agency builder helps you bounce back when things get really, really tough, and includes problem-solving skills, persistence of will. But the key we think is really interesting, and it folds back into this whole narrative around hope. All this problem-solving skills, persistence of will, but it's all founded on hope. Now, we love that word, but hope is not just the positive expectation of good, Dave. It's the reasonable grounds for it. So our question and our heartbeat for our people who engage with this is helping them find their reasonable grounds. What are they? And helping them find that sustainable anchor point that enables them to bounce when they do fall. They've got their persistence of will and their problem-solving skills, which are all learned. They're behaviors that are learned and therefore taught. And therefore we need to do this collectively. And that's part of the strand of your bungee rope. You're doing it with others. Prevention is better together, Dave. Love that tag. Prevention's better together. Resiliency is clearly better together. And so that's kind of in a roundabout way, that's our definition, if you like, because we sort of encapsulate various aspects of that. I think a lot of people have bounced out of these ideas over the years, but lot of your listeners may not know the gentleman by the name of George MacDonald. Now, he's a very old author. He was a children's author and a fiction writer, a couple of centuries ago. In fact, he was nearly a couple of centuries ago, sorry. He was the mentor of Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland. And so this guy is quite a remarkable individual. But he said back then, and a lot of people have bounced out of this and used different issues, he said, when it comes to resiliency in one sense, people need three things in life. They need something to do, someone to love, and something to hope for. So it's fascinating that those ingredients have been around for millennia, not millennia, centuries. And again, we've just had different iterations of it. So for us, it is, really, really important to inculcate. And that's the thing. It's not just look, here's a formula. Let's put this in play and see what happens. This is kind of a recalibration of the way you see, the way you understand, the way you engage, who you engage with and how. And so all those factors are really important. And again, building together. I think that's a really key issue. And that's part of what the Dalgarno Institute's all about, is helping empower and equip to that end. So,
and I'm glad you brought up the misperception of what it means to be, resilient and honing in that resilient individuals do face challenges. They do fall. But it's that bouncing back, and that mindset of early for me, I thought resilience was my ability to keep my emotions locked up down deep inside and not show weakness, not be vulnerable, and I'm tough. I'm that super soldier kind of thing. And how that mindset, that mentality was a big block for me that just prolonged and actually deepened my suck. Yeah, I feel that.
Of course, when you're in that space, one of the words that comes to mind when you talk about that is quite a common word, is control. Mm-hmm. And not just exercising control, but keeping it is incredibly demanding. Mm-hmm. And if you're trying to control your environment, you can trying to control your response to your environment, and particularly if your emotions are just not compliant. Mm-hmm. And one of the things about, and I try and share this as often as I can, Dave, and I may, if with your permission, kind of disclose in this context as well. My persona, my personality presents a certain way, but it belies something that not hidden by choice or certainly by design. But I'm a very fragile individual, emotionally incredibly fragile. And for a whole bunch of reasons that some are clearly definable, others aren't. My world is incredibly vulnerable and emotionally speaking. So if I emote and if I engage with an issue or a scenario or a predicament or a crisis or a trauma with my emotions, if I lead with that, I'm undone. Look, I'm undone. I'm unraveled. Unless I engage, and that my personality is, Shane's he's that guy. He's that, go-to, in control. He's articulate. He knows what he's doing. That's a feedback I get from a lot of people. And I say, well, I'm looking from the inside out, guy. That's not how I feel I tick. Mm-hmm. And so people think that you're putting on a front. That's not true. And I think for a lot of people that what you see is not a front or a facade. It's who they are, their personality, but their emotional state or their psychosocial condition can vary for all sorts of reasons. It could be a circumstantial trauma, a relational issue. It could be a long-standing health issue. I know I've suffered 2 major bouts of depression in my life that have really knocked the stuffing out of me. And I've also been burnt out 4 times. And that has a similar feel to depression, but it's a different animal. It has different, it requires different addressing issues. But it's important that people understand that your emotions and your personality, as important as they are not the final arbiters of how you respond. Resilience is built on so much more than that. And so people who transact out of personality or emotion, if they're great, look, if they're buoyant, upbeat, in control, their persona is that, and they're just on, awesome. And they have that, they're always, yeah, man, glasses always are full. I just feel, it's just great, I know it's going to work out. Why? Because I just feel it in my waters. That's awesome. I am, God bless you. That's fantastic that you're in that space.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've found is emotions can be incredibly fleeting. And if they evaporate and your resiliency is geared to or tethered to that, then your resilience evaporates with it. And so it's important to delineate between the two. And it's okay to be, buoyant and emotionally up, and that's all fantastic. But that resiliency is so much more than just how we feel about a situation. And again, our culture in the last 20 years has really, I think, disturbingly informed us that your emotions are in the end the final arbiter of how you perceive a setting or a state that you might be in. I feel this, therefore I am.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than the Descartesian principle of I think, therefore I am, it's like I feel, therefore I am. And again, feelings are geared to so much more triggers in our environment that are unpredictable. And if you're not aware, and this is where awareness and self-awareness is so important, then you can be really quickly undone. So in all that, I just think it's really important that people understand that it's okay to be out of control emotionally. It's okay to be psychologically confused and oh dear, this is, I'm freaking out. But you've got this resilient toolkit in play in the background going, okay, well, now I can dip into my toolkit. Mm-hmm. I'm not dictated to by my setting or my internal or external setting. I am now going to respond, not react, with these resources that I've been building. And this is where what we try and do with Dalgarno. And of course, the alcohol and other drug space is obviously our bread and butter, but they are symptoms of a bigger problem. And they are usually tools they are counterfeit tools, what I call counterfeit mechanisms we use to cope with those feelings or circumstances that have caused us to fall. And we feel out of control. And then, so we just want to try and gather that back in, and we jump on to the booze or to the, to the sedative or to the, sadly to opioids or, stimulants to try and feel different. And of course that just adds to the unraveling. But so in all of that, I think it's really important that people, even in themselves and when they interact with others, are really aware that there's a lot going on in people's lives, and not to take things for granted or not to take that which is on the outside as to be the is-all and end-all, even though it may be. And so, I think they're just things that help people step back from that need to be, as you said, double down on control, keep the facade up at all costs, and of course what that does internally is quite damaging.
Emotions, it's been a big journey for me, in that I first kind of had to allow myself to feel emotions and not try to control them. Then I had to learn how to understand what those feelings and emotions were, which even included like building my vocabulary. Like, I feel something, what do I even call it? How can I name it?
Beautiful. Yeah.
Then I had to learn, okay, now how do I communicate? How do I talk about them? And then sort of the more recent learning has actually been with my coach, Jen Schneeman. She's my resilience coach and my nervous system coach. And it hopefully she taught me well if I don't muck this one up. But it's about learning sort of controlling my energy and focus, in that I can acknowledge I have an emotion or a feeling, but not let it come front and center. I can just look over and, okay, I see you. And then come back center and make my choice, and being able to protect my energy, my nervous system in that way. And one of the examples or the practice things was to, I'm looking at the camera, looking at you right now, but hey, guess what? I also notice without looking at it, I know my water is right here on my desk. I know my mouse is right here. So I can have this awareness, but it not be the sole focus of everything that I'm doing. And it's kind of similar to emotions as well. Yeah.
No,
yeah.
That makes sense. I think the famous seminal coach of the sector, James Whitmore, I think once said that awareness is knowing what's going on around you. Self-awareness is knowing how you're responding to it. And I think that's a really, and that what you've just, simply but effectively communicated is that I am aware, but I'm not governed by, or nor even am I necessarily intimidated or challenged by. I'm just, and holding that tension is really, really important. And that's where a lot of young people, they've not been given opportunity to learn that. Again, there's, for reasons we won't go into here, we can drill down into this and spend hours, but in a digital age too, there's the intensity of focus, the engagement that to borrow the title of a book, the digital cocaine, is incredibly addictive, and therefore it draws you in, and your capacity to be aware and even certainly self-aware is almost gone, because you're so immersed in an environment that's not actually healthy, an environment that doesn't build resiliency. In fact, it draws from you, and you may feel entertained in that process, but you're actually being depleted. And so unless there's a deliberate, and this is where we people rely on instinct as opposed to deliberate strategy and plan. Unless there's a deliberate action, then we simply bounce out of instinct, and the instinct's also already been interfered with by environments that we're not aware of. So we think we're making decisions, but in fact decisions are making us. And that's the problematic scenario that creates spiraling in people, and they're just not aware of it. So the idea of resilience building, a big part of resilience building is creating awareness, helping people see beyond that, getting their eyes up there. Oh, perspective. It's like okay, I can see a little bit more. I think one of the old anthropological principles, I mentioned this previously, we might have chatted. If I have, by all means, delete. But was the principle of the question is, what do you see? To answer that question, you've got to ask the question, what are you looking at? And then to answer that question, what are you looking at? You've got to ask, where are you standing? See, where you stand determines what you look at, and what you look at determines what you see. And this is the paradigmatic issue. So where are people standing? What are they looking at? What are they seeing? What are they seeing? What are they standing? What are they looking at? So again, I think helping young people and even older people, but young people get that kind of basic, it's just a really basic tool, then they can stop and go, oh, hang on a minute, what am I looking at? Where am I standing? Okay. And all of a sudden that moment is just a pause, and that can create enough awareness to generate a better choice-making scenario.
I love how simple it is. And just that perspective anchoring and awareness can then lead to that shift, that perspective shift. And one small activity that I do with both youth, college students, and also adults, and I actually just did this activity last week with a group of adults that work in higher education universities. And I just call it the A game, B game. And I just prompt them, hey, write down a list of things that help you bring your A game. Well-rested, organized, prepared, whatever it might be. And then it's flip it. Okay, what are some things that cause you to bring your B game? And this last week, one of the fellows was like, we're always so busy. We never take time to reflect and actually think about this stuff. It's like, yeah. But these little things can help you be more resilient. Like I brought it back to, you just listed out some of your resilience makers and some of your resilience breakers. As simple as that. Like,
it is those moments of I think clarity that I think is really, really, really powerful. That can, and this is where conversations are really important. I mean, having obviously workshops is vital, particularly in a deliberate setting aside time, particularly in the corporate space or education space, when people are constantly in the loop or in the what's the word? The Ferris wheel, not the word. the rat wheel.
Oh,
And
yeah.
They just need someone to stop that wheel, get out of that for a minute, and go, oh, okay. And those workshops and those moments are going to happen. But I think conversations, we have something in Australia called Are You OK Day, which is a great idea, but the idea is so basic that one day a year we deliberately go around where asking the question, so how are you? Are you okay today? And to really investigate, are you okay? But I think, of course, the idea behind that is to generate some sort of, they're a little bit more aware of people's needs around them. But I think even in conversation, this is where, as a coach or just a caring other, you can actually engage with someone and just ask the question that helps them reflect. And that B game, A game kind of question is really important. But even just in the day-to-day conversations, when you come across a situation and you're looking at someone and you're aware of what's going on, you can see something a little bit different. Their B game, use your terms, the B game is in play. So you say, what's going on today, man? Why aren't you performing? Get your act together. Come on, suck it up, Or say, okay, so what's been happening, bro? So tell me about your weekend, No, what's going on? You okay? You doing okay? So I'm forget work. What's okay? And so those kind of moments just open up a person's perspective, and then you can deposit something, even their listening ear is enough, but something that and they go, well, yeah, I actually need to get quiet. Lunchtime I might go outside and sit in the sun for a bit and just be still. And something as simple and basic as that can actually shift someone positively.
Absolutely. And a couple thoughts I want to share.
Sure.
Well, I'll say one thought, get your response to it, and then I want to take our conversation to the big why, and I'll set that up and share a little bit about why the why is so important as it relates to my own personal journey. But in talking resilience, one of the paradigms or the mindsets that I would love to see shift in the main society is looking at resilience as a part of the 8 dimensions. Make it the 9th dimension of wellness, and think of resilience as prevention, not reaction, response, treatment, or intervention. Same thing with like self-care.
Yes.
We often, I'm burnout. I need a mental health day. I need a self-care day because, they go, crash. But why not treat it like prevention? And you're talking about already kind of put it in the bank, make a deposit. Yeah. What does resilience building look like as prevention, not as a response to a crisis?
Yeah, that's a really important question, and one that has got many layers of answers. My first thought on that, and again I'm borrowing from an old school actor. I think most of your listeners will be aware of or familiar with Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I mean, his quadrant I thought was fascinating to watch. His quadrant that you're familiar with that one. The 4 quadrants, yeah. So you've got the urgent and important. You got the important but not urgent. You got the urgent but not important, and you got the not important and not urgent. It's quadrants, right? And most of us bounce out of these two. With the urgent and important, the demands are high. We're constantly being driven, pushed, and once we get to the point we go, we hopefully finish our task, we don't burn out, and then we just go to the veg quadrant, the veg out quadrant. The not important, not urgent, just do whatever. Not wrong or bad per se, but they don't equip. They are reactive spaces. They are driven spaces, or they are retreat spaces. Whereas the second quadrant, I think, is really important. It's the important but not urgent. So what is it in my toolkit of resilience? What is it in my repertoire that is foundational. I think that's a word I like to use a lot, is foundational. This is an anchor point. And I think it's interesting when you talk to people about, borrowing again from another famous author, was if your life is a ship, right? For example, you're a ship, and obviously life is the ocean, and you're launched onto the ocean. I won't go into the deep existential dynamics around that, or why here, but it's interesting that the question you ask actors in settings is, okay, well, what does your boat need to be seaworthy, to make the journey, to get there? So that question, what is the inventorying of things that you think you need as a ship person? So people talk about, a good mast, solid hull, good steering wheel, good rudder, all those kind of great answers, But what does your ship need to stop it from banging into other ships, hitting other ships? And that's another question. But it's interesting. There's one implement. Now, people come up with all these great ideas and great insights. And it's wonderful when you see people do that, because they are starting to dig out of their trove of what they may or may not have. But then when it comes to the anchor, people, and this is where it's one of the things that really sabotages a lot of the some of the self-help spaces that can generate that, you have everything within you and it's great, and they're great. Some great ideas there. But the anchor, when I say to the groups that working with, say your anchor, how when is that useful? So when it's deployed. That's okay. So do you deploy it onto the deck of your boat? Boom. I've deployed my anchor. Yeah, I've let it go. Yeah. Well, no, it's not going to change anything. So where does it have to be deployed? Outside of your boat to something bigger, something stationary, especially when you're in crisis. So it's interesting so this is the whole principle around that. One of those important but not urgent things is, what is your anchor and where can you deploy it? So when you've got that in your toolkit, and this is where the hope found, what is your, hope is a positive expectation of good, but the reasonable grounds for it. So, what is a reasonable grounds that you can deploy your anchor onto? Now, that's a really important question. And when you've got that kind of sorted, and in back of house, it's deliberate, it's intentional, it's considered, it's, all those important, vigilant things, then when you deploy that anchor, even though the storm is raging, the mast is snapped, you're heading towards the rocks, when you let this thing out, bang, hooks. And it, again, like the bungee rope, you get knocked around by the storm, but you're not driven onto the rocks and you're not shipwrecked. And I'm using some very graphic terminology here, but you get my drift. Mm-hmm. And so I think that one of the things about developing a resiliency toolkit is having those bigger questions kind of, you've had to think about those, and you've had a reflection on those. You've had an investigation into those. And I think that's one of the issues that's missing in a lot of the narratives and a lot of the conversations that are had, is that this is kind of avoided a little bit. So, well, it's a bit existential. We don't want to go there. Let's just dial it back a bit to the how-tos and the quick fixes and the scaffoldings. And again, nothing wrong with any of those. Please hear that. I use them all the time. But in the end of the day, we want to get back to some substantive places where we've got foundational things that we can anchor to. And I think that's what helps people not just be strong and resilient in themselves, but they can be that for others as well. And I think that's one of the most profound things of resilient agency, is that it impacts so many more people than the self. When you're around a resilient person, and a resilient person's in your team and in your setting and things are going pear-shaped, and you got a resilient person there and it's extra resilient, it resonates. It engages you in a more proactive, way. And I think it instills hope too in people. I think that's one of the things that you want to do. And again, it's the whole, going back to George MacDonald, something to something to do, someone to love, and something to hope for. And I think those kind of implements, those kind of tools are indispensable. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. A little sidetrack moment here to shout out the Pathways to Prevention podcast. I was interviewing a lady about her recovery journey, and as I sort of reflected back what I was hearing, each of those three were right there prominent, and she had articulated her story as those being stepping stones in her path to where she is today. And when I pointed that out, her eyes got all big, and she just had this slow smile, just, oh, I see it, the beautiful design. Yeah, so just a fun little moment I wanted to share. But anchors, and I think sort of term that I've used when I talk about one of mine being, my why statement, my why, that big overarching why behind everything that I do.
Mm-hmm.
I call it my North Star. Being Army, we weren't in ships. That was for the Navy. I was boots on the ground, walking through the dark. And so I had my North Star for navigation. No matter where I was at, that's how I could figure out where I was and what direction I needed to go. And I had the opportunity of actually doing a workshop with part of Simon Sinek's crew to find my why. And that it's my point of reference. Am I living true to me? Am I living in alignment with my why? And I know that's a big part of what y'all do at the Dalgarno Institute, and talk about it with terms of resilience. How would you articulate the concept of why?
Yeah. Well, why is actually in the affective domain of education. I think that's a really important distinction, and we labor this point because we determine it, define three arenas of educational domains. The cognitive domain, which is clearly, that's the what, the when, the how, the who, the where, all those are very important things, very fact-based, cognitive, data collection, synthesizing, logic, reason, all very important and vital. In fact, the basis of education, of course, and learning. The judicial educator, which is, we call the law. In other words, they are a codified sets of values and ideas that are to help determine best practice for communities. And so for health and well-being, for safety, for discourse, for public discourse, public interaction. So the judicial educator is not meant to be a punitive thing. It's not, the law isn't there to say you did the wrong thing, we're going to punish you. No, this is a boundary, a hard boundary that says, no, okay, you want to mess with this boundary. Said you're actually breaking society. So we're going to help you recalibrate so you don't break society, but as importantly, you don't break yourself, because this is about best practice. So, but then the third one, I think, is the one that we miss, and it's the one hardest to do, because once you start stepping into the affective domain, this is the why, this is the context, this is the ethical, moral, paradigmatic driver. It's like, what is your worldview? What is it based on? What is its anchor points? What is its, I like that the term reference point. And we did a series years ago called Worldview in the Wheelbarrow, because we talk about everybody in the planet, and all our listeners will get this. Everybody listening to this podcast, if you were born, that's all of us, you started life as a wheelbarrow. Now, a wheelbarrow is an empty and powerless vessel that's filled by someone else and pushed by someone else. No one escapes this. Until you hit adolescence, until your brain, your pituitary gland goes pop and your brain starts to move into the I want to self-govern, everything is taught. And you learn everything by being taught. And your environments, that which instructs or doesn't instruct, that which invests doesn't invest, that which cares for doesn't care for, informs you. That wheelbarrow is filled by that, and you have very little control over that. And that's a reality. In fact, that's a design factor. We're supposed to learn from the people that bring us life. They're supposed to care for us and love us and bless us and add to us, and but often that's not the case. So we'll start life as wheelbarrows, not a problem. But then when we start to take charge of our wheelbarrow, hang on a minute, I want to determine what goes into the wheelbarrow, who pushes that. Very important. So what is that going to be? And of course, what's gone before determines that. And that's why the why factor is so important. And so when you talk from an anthropological perspective, and this is really important, sociology and psychology tend to deal with behavioral and cross-sectional aspects, which are really important, absolutely vital. What's going on now, why this happens here, and what are the outcomes and what are the ramifications and how do we amend or how do we develop that? When it comes to anthropology, you're talking about the entire spectrum, from not just behaviors and outcomes, but belief systems and value systems and paradigms. And those things are absolutely indispensable in understanding why a group of people behave a certain way and why is that practice better than the other practice. And is best practice possible to find, and who determines what is best practice? So again, these are questions that are a little bit too big for the teenage brain or the adolescent brain. But I think, we go back only 120 years. They were just normal parts of the teenage journey. In fact, the adolescence has always kind of been there, but we didn't have what we now know as adolescence. We had children and they had puberty, they become adults. And they had to step into adult roles and adult settings and learn how to behave like an adult. But adolescence was kind of this post-World War II phenomena where we stayed in the state of play or outside of responsibility for longer periods of time. And as a result, we've lost some of the capacity to, we're going to that space. But I think this is where the why is so important, Dave. And these are the conversations that are rarely had because they are a little bit more complex. They do require a little bit more investment, and they do require some internal, inventory that some people feel uncomfortable with. But I think one of the keys to really building a profound resilience that isn't easily shifted by, some of the seismic things that are happening in our culture. When you see some of the things that are happening around it and how it can easily disrupt us and dishevel us, I think, and they're real, it's awful. But when you've got a more substantive understanding from an anthropological perspective of why and why is it sustainable, then all of a sudden those things do not shift you the way they used to. They're concerning, but you can address them and engage with resources that perhaps other lesser contexts can give you. And I'm, trying to avoid certain language for the sake of your listeners, but I think this is really important. And one of the reasons why when we do certain workshops, we like to invest heavily, day-long retreats where we actually go into. So what are some of the things that are building your why, and what are they based on? And are they foundational? Are they scaffolding or are they foundation building? And nothing wrong with scaffolding, but if you want to build a foundation, what does that look like? And how deep do you go? Depends on, well, again, we all know the higher the building, the deeper the foundation. Well, if you want it to be sustainable, if you want a building to hold that's 10 stories, you need to go down at least 2 or 3 to make sure that it can hold. So again, these are the kind of things we want to invest and inculcate into communities, because once they get that, all of a sudden, some of the phenomena that presents to them doesn't knock them off their perch, and they don't go into free falls. Families or communities or even individuals don't go into these free falls. They get hurt, they get knocked around, but they bounce back very quickly because of this anthropological context. And again, I'll stop on that to go around the mountain a few times.
I want to share my screen, and I want to put my why up on the screen and chat about how this helps me be a more resilient individual. and that to live and share a life of continued growth so that we may overcome adversity and live a fulfilling life. Deconstruct that. How can that help me be a more resilient person? That's my why. That's my North Star. So like in my mind, the live and share a life of continued growth, when I get faced with adversity, crisis, a challenge, I'm struggling, this grounds me in that it's a growth moment. I'm learning.
That's what I was
I'm
gonna say.
learning.
Yep.
Adversity is coming. It's going to always come. But that to stay grounded in that living a life of continued growth is the way to live a fulfilling life. It's that mindset of, I'm always learning, I'm always growing. And then the share in there is also really feels like it pulls me to that higher purpose, in that in my dark days, it would have been great to hear that hope, like you talked about, from someone that has already lived and learned those lessons to give me that glimmer of hope. And so that's also an important part of my why, is to share. So maybe somebody that's in that moment or hasn't had that moment happen yet, but will be prepared when they have a dark day come. And so when I'm faced with a business decision, when I'm faced with a life decision, when I'm feeling burnout, overwhelmed, overextended, stressed, you name it, I can come back to this why. That is my computer wallpaper, and it reminds me. It anchors me.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And I think you've articulated that well, because when we're in a phase of growth, and there's a famous life coach that he will remain nameless today, but he said, you can change without growing, but you cannot grow without changing. And the beauty of continual growth, it's not just about this kind of a faux progressiveness where I'm just trying to be better. No, this is about actually discovering new facets, new dynamics, new deeper truths that add not just to me, but to my setting. And I think there's enough self-help concepts out there that about feeding my need, again, knock yourself out, that's your call. But this building resilience goes beyond the self. And that sowing, you're sowing into yourself, but you're sowing into those around you. And that in itself broadens your context. And that broadening the context leads you into deeper understandings. And that in turn adds to growth. And this continual, it's like a revolution. It just keeps, it's not just going back in on itself. It's not a loop, but it keeps moving forward. And that is not about trying to find a new thing. It's about discovering what is there that is sustainable, significant, anthropologically sound. And that's what I think where resiliency building and resiliency building coaching is so important. It helps people, what you're doing right there is continually grow. And that every moment, every adversity enables a person to go beyond. And even it might take a time. It may be a fact that this person not just goes beyond initially, but actually falls down. And in the falling down, in the shared moment, it's okay. You fell down, but I'm here. Let's get up. Now, what? Not just what have we learned, but where do we go now? And this is about directional dynamics. And when people have that direction, they have hope. So you take the direction out or the hope out, you use interchangeable terms, then people they tend to collapse back into that moment of despair. And this is why, I love that and that is fulfilling. The very dynamic itself fulfills. It brings life and it completes life at the same time. Yeah, great.
I like that you honed in on growth also, because I when I first sort of started crafting this why statement, I wrestled with that term. And then I kind of realized that I had tunnel vision. on what growth meant.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you were unpacking it, the image of a big, strong tree came to mind, and that growth looks a lot of different directions with a tree, growing their roots down and out to have that solid base, and growing up to grow tall, and the branches and leaves growing out, and there's seasons of growth. And so that was just front and center in my mind. Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. In another life, I was a forest officer, and so
I didn't know that. Talking trees, okay.
I mean, you can always this can be edited out, but we talk in a forest context. We obviously harvesting, producing what they call silviculture, tree growing, is growing trees in certain settings and for certain purposes. And what we found, what we call a dominant tree. This is something that I've had to learn, and it's helped me in my resiliency journey. But it was a tough lesson. But it was a powerful lesson, and may be relevant to some of your listeners. It may not be. But particularly in the arena of leadership and of growth and of not just becoming, and I think, or producing, but of sowing into the bigger context. And this is where it's interesting. You have a dominant tree, that, as you said, the tree that goes deep down, roots are big, and it's got a big head and it's magnificent. But when you find that tree, you'll find one thing that is absolutely without fail around it. There are no other trees. Every other thing is a small tree or a shrub. That tree is a dominant tree. Beautiful, magnificent, fantastic. And what we do, and that's great, and that's for a season, that tree had to be there. Now, what we do with that tree is we want to use that land. We want to see other trees grow. We want to see that land produce more timber. What we do is we harvest all the magnificent mature seed from that tree. It is a great seed producer. Mm-hmm. But then we cut the tree down. And then we sow where that tree used to be and pop. Where was one tree, there is now 20. Right? Now that's a shocking lesson for some people. Like, my tree's been cut down. So, and I think I've had that's happened in my life. In other words, sometimes you get to a point in your growth and your development where you need to leave and go to a new space. You need to end that season so others can grow, because what you've done in that growth, in that fulfilling life, in that investing in others, they are now growing and they got space to grow because you've given them the room. You've granted them the space and you've sown the very best of yourself into their ground. Now that is for me is a powerful analogy. And when I've been through this twice. And it is hard. The first time it happened, I was shattering. It's like, my thing, my identity, because I realized, hang on a minute, one of the growth factors for me in building resilience for me was my strength and my identity are not in my performance or my role. Mm-hmm. It's in something far more important than that. Mm-hmm. And so learning resiliency outside of a role or an identity is really powerful. And the person who is in that space is incredibly resilient. And I know that for, again, an emotionally fragile person, my resiliency is remarkable. And people, again, from the outside looking in might, oh, that's just who you are. But no, I'm the fetal position person when crisis hits. That's my emotional response. But because of these resiliency building factors and these realities and these growth cycles I've been through, and the capacity to be able to let it all go and sow it into others, even at your own expense, seemingly, in fact, it isn't. And it's a wonderful liberating thing, and it builds a great deal of resilience because you know that you can start again and you can do it all again. It's because you go to a new space, a new piece of ground, and off we go again.
Where the shock, if you saw it in my eyes when you're talking about cutting the tree down, wasn't around the cutting my tree down. It was the thought popped in my head. You said, and 20 new trees pop up. Oh my gosh, 20 kids? Ain't no way. Okay. One is keeping me busy enough as is.
I hear you.
But just to underline, sort of to highlight the identity piece, that was a big part of my growth journey as well, in that I had these different jobs, titles that became my identity. And with those were misperceptions, stigma around the norms, the behavior. So think combat veteran, Army sniper, that whole identity and the stigma wrapped up there. And then being a police officer. Didn't matter if I was on duty or off duty. When folks interacted with me, friends, family, people in the community, I was always a, quote, cop. Didn't matter. That job title was my identity. And finally, I started to realize and recognize that. And the turmoil I felt inside was that I didn't want my job title to define my identity. I want to be Dave in the same, like wherever I am. Like, I'm just Dave, man. But that, I feel that identity piece. Yeah.
And look, all of us, are trying to find identity. I think significance and identity are part of the journey. But again, how we find that and where we find it, as you've just said, is important. And authenticity in who we are. But we look to categories, we look to criteria to define us, and certainly lived experience and earned resiliency, particularly for those in the recovery space, and just chime back into that arena. I think that's important. That is incredibly valuable, but that's also can be problematic because then my new identity, my new sense of self, is based on a whole series of bad choices and or journeying out of, toxic environments, great lessons to learn. But all of a sudden, if I'm not careful, I can't be the Dave or the Shane. I am the recovering drug user who's got lived experience and earned resiliency to impart to you. And again, nothing wrong with that. Absolutely love it. I teach on it. And as you've seen some of the stuff we've done. Clearly, but if that becomes your identity, then that becomes problematic as well. And I think that's where we need to, this defining of self has got to be much bigger than our environments or our context or our experiences. It's quite a big deal. And as you said in your mantra, is that it is growing. It's continually growing. I am being added to. And as a result, I am adding to my environment. I am a proactive actor in my environments. And I'm not defined by that, but I'm known for it. And I think that's a very important thing when people, and you don't have to be a rock star to do that. And young people have got to get that. Influencers are not the person with the most likes. The influencer is the person who in 20 years' time, someone says, I remember what Bill did for me. I remember what Dave said to me. That really, he spent time with me. That mattered. He gave me this bit of advice. That helped. Now, they're the influencers. They're the strategic operators. And I think resiliency building is always about helping people become more strategic in the way they build into their communities, they build into their settings. And for me and for Dalgarno Institute, that's where resiliency and the World Resiliency Day, World Resiliency Week is all about that. It's what are you doing to build into your community, not perform for them, not, be that rock star, that, that great icon of, knowledge, a font of universal wisdom, nothing wrong with any of those things, and we talk to experts all the time. I'm talking to one right now and love it. And, and glean from that. And that's fantastic. But it's helping people understand that you're the everyday hero. And the resilient person in the middle of a crisis, the resilient person in the middle of temptation or adversity or pressure, peer pressure, they're the real heroes. They're the people that I think our communities need to lean into more. But I digress.
Well, I glad you mentioned it because I want to kind of just bring this conversation to a wrap up for now because we'll have many, many more conversations. But yeah, tell us about World Resiliency Day and Week.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I didn't mean to throw that in there, but yeah, that's coming up in June. We created that as a global platform. It's not a product or a performance or anything like that. It is a platform, and it is to bring as many resources globally together in one place on a continual basis, annual basis, yearly basis, to refocus that, to bring to the communities, wherever they are globally, wherever you are in your community, resources and ideas and strategies and principles and conversations around what it is to build resiliency in your space, particularly to push back against the counterfeit coping mechanism of substance use. If you want to unravel someone quickly, give them drugs. You want to unravel a young person very, very fast. Regardless of we live in an analgesic culture, so we want to feel better, but we're only getting worse. We feel better, but we're only getting worse. Substance use is always a counterfeit. It can present as a coping mechanism. It's sold as a coping mechanism. It is a chemical timeout from the vicissitudes of life, to quote one pro-drug activist, which is just such a toxic, faux resiliency, mechanism. It's sold as a coping mechanism, or sold as a pleasure zone moment, or a hedonistic top up. And what it does is unravel those. So the reason we paired it on this 26th to the 30th of June, we paired it with what used to be called World Drug Day. Now it's World Day Against Drug Trafficking, and that same week, because we think these two go together. It's not just about being anti something, it's about being pro something. We are pro growth. We are pro, development. We are pro building capacity and agency, not taking it away. And that's what substances do, Dave. They just take from you. In fact, the theme this year is about, being stolen. What's being stolen from you, and who's stealing it, and who you let steal it, So that's the idea, is to try and generate a different narrative, particularly for young people and families, and in communities where substance use is entrenched and or burgeoning. We want to, generate resources and ideas and conversations and principles that can help people, not say yes to drugs.
Not say yes. Okay. Well, listeners, check the show notes. There'll be links to the World Resiliency Day and Week website, all the resources that will be populated there over the coming months, Dalgarno Institute's website, as well as social media. But one call to action for y'all listening, watching. As soon as you're done, I want you to go check out the Unnecessary Harm podcast. Give them a subscribe, give them a listen. Hang out with Shane just a little bit more, because that is his podcast, and wonderful energy, wonderful wisdom, and some pretty stellar guests. So yeah, go check out the Unnecessary Harm podcast. And Shane, always an honor, always learning, having conversation with you, right in alignment with my why, living a life of continued growth. You help me do just that by always sharing your nuggets of wisdom and also lending an ear to my rambling. So I can't thank you enough. Keep on keeping on.
Absolute pleasure, Dave, as always. And we can be self-congratulating and mutually affirming, but seriously, incredibly positive time, and I learn and grow every time I engage with you. And this is what should be happening when we come together. All of us should be learning and growing and bouncing out and adding value to each other. So thank you again for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Prevention Leaders Podcast with Dave Closson. Since prevention is better together, make sure you click the subscribe button and share this and other episodes with a friend. If you have a topic idea or guest suggestion, follow us on social media or email us at info@preventionleaders.com.